Greetings, friends. I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Omar Harami, and I want to thank you for joining us to the latest Kumi Now online gathering. Today, we are focusing on Israel's discriminatory and illegal treatment of Palestinians when it comes to family unification. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by our partner organization, Adalah, and to have Adi Mansour, who I just got to meet him before the session in person, and he's filled with energy and many gifts. Again, I want to remind everyone that this session is being broadcasted live on Facebook. So if you don't wish your photo to appear online, just turn off the video camera. And you can also change your name if that is something, instead of writing your name, you can rename yourself as anonymous, or if that is your wish. So I would like us to welcome Adi Mansour, and as it has been the tradition, we ask the speakers to introduce themselves. Adi.
Thank you. So my name is Adi Mansour. I'm from Haifa. I'm a lawyer in Adalah, Adalah Legal Center, which is based in Haifa. I work in the political and civil rights department within the organization. I've been here for almost the last year. We're working on various subjects, also representing Palestinians in criminal courts when it comes to freedom of speech and freedom of expression. We also litigate and file petitions against racist laws or laws that affect Palestinians in general, and specifically Palestinians who are in Israel. We've also worked in the last year representing 3 organizations from the Palestinian 6 that were designated as terrorist organizations. And this is just a glimpse on the work that we do. And also we filed, of course, a petition against the citizenship and entry law, which is called the Family Unification Law, on the 13th of March, 2 days after the law has passed. And I'm, on a personal level, I'm also a political and social activist. I'm part of the Haifa Youth Movement based in Haifa. And during my university years, I was part of Jafra Student Faction and also part of the Arab Law Students Forum. This is it, I guess, as an introduction. And I would like to give the first, let's say, 10-15 minutes to talk about the law and our petition that we filed against it. But I want also to give a larger floor to questions and to have a real and deep discussion about the subject. Okay. So what we're talking about when we discuss the family unification is that as part of the oppression and control practiced by the state of Israel, it also practices its control on the right to love and to have a family, basically. So the state in itself has the ability to decide which and who has the right to form a family, where to live with their family, and also to decide that this specific family cannot live in the same household. Now, the law that passed in 2003 was a continuation to the government decision in 2002, which basically decided that we as a state are going to prevent Palestinians from marrying each other. So if you are a Palestinian from the West Bank or from the Gaza Strip, and you want to marry a Palestinian from within the 48 line, the green line, you can do that, but you are not allowed to live within the state of Israel. Now, what we're talking about as a phenomenon is one of the most racist decisions, one of the most racist laws. I think it's even the most racist law that exists within Israel, and basically provides us to a glimpse about the apartheid characteristics that the regime has. So the law in itself, it creates a system of racial segregation on different aspects. On the first aspect, it tells you that you, as a Palestinian who is a citizen of Israel, do not have the same rights as an Israeli, as a Jewish Israeli who was born to the same place. A Jewish Israeli, according to the right of return law, provides him basically with an ability to form a family with whomever he wants. And there was an Israeli High Court of Justice decision from the 90s, if I'm not wrong, that basically said that even if you are Jewish Israeli and you want to marry someone who's foreign, you can do that, and he can later become a citizen through a process. He has to go through different stages until he reaches citizenship. Now, what the law tells you is that you, as a Palestinian, if you're marrying another Palestinian or another Arab from an enemy country, this other person cannot gain citizenship in no way possible. And the problem in its essence is that it enters the core of citizenship, the core of the right to have citizenship and to have a family, and tells you that the state in its core will not let any other Palestinian or Arab to enter from another country and have citizenship on this land. So we're talking about this level. On another level, it tells you that if you are a Palestinian who married another Palestinian, and you as a woman did not reach the age of 25, and you as a man did not reach the age of 35, you cannot live together. So also, apart from the situation where you cannot gain citizenship and hold a normal a normal family and have basic rights within the state as any foreign person coming to the state, let's say you're from Jerusalem and you married a person from Bethlehem. If he does not have a work permit, he cannot enter Jerusalem and live with you in the same household. And many times, due to the economic situation and the occupation, many of the opportunities are in the state of Israel and are not in the West Bank, obviously. And we have situations, and some of the petitioners who finished degrees in the universities, but were not able to work or come into Israel and work as part of things that they have learned, and are not able to gain any expertise in what they were part of. So this is another level. A third level, even if you're above 35 as a man and 25 as a woman, and you are allowed to live together. So after this age, you are allowed to live together in the same household in the state of Israel. Even after that, you cannot gain citizenship, and in many instances, you cannot even gain a permit, a usual permit like people who live in Jerusalem to live inside of Israel. So to have an identity, a blue identity, many times you cannot have that. Now, what does that mean? What it means is that you can live physically in the state of Israel. You can have healthcare. It's more expensive, but you can have healthcare. But let's say you studied medicine and you are a doctor. So you want to practice medicine in any hospital in Israel. What they would tell you that you have a permit to stay according to the Family Unification Agreement for a year. The agreement is only valid for a year. So the hospital would tell you, we don't know what would happen with you after this year. Why would we have you as an employee if we don't have any idea of what would happen with you a year afterwards? How can we have you as an employee and know for sure that you are going to stay with us for a longer period. So what happens eventually is that even if you reach a level where you're allowed to stay within the state, you cannot practice many degrees or many works that you have the ability to work on. You cannot work on them, and you cannot practice the things that you love only because you cannot promise the place that you work and that you would get this permit 1 year afterwards. So each and every year, you have to go to the Ministry of Interior and ask them to renew your family unification permit. And they can decide on many occasions, they can decide on security concerns that they would not give you. Many times, they even enter your personal details. So they would ask you, how are things in your family? I heard that you and your wife are fighting. Is this true? So many times they get inside your household and they try to get inside the information, inside the daily lifestyle that you are living, in order to say, this is not a real marriage. This does not adequate to a situation where you can have family unification, and therefore we will not give you the status. So the law, and as we read through the law continuously, and eventually we filed the petition, we understood that despite the official language that is said by the state that this law is for security reasons, this law comes in order to protect ourselves from whatsoever terrorists, as they call, this law enshrines and basically builds up a demographic and an ideological system, maintaining somehow a demographic stability within Israel, where there is a Jewish majority and an Arab Palestinian minority. Now, this is not something that I have invented. This is something that members of the Knesset, some of them are part in the legislation of this law, said very specifically. They said that we have a right as a Jewish nation to protect ourselves. We have a right to maintain a Jewish identity of the state. And in order to maintain this, we have to control the amount of people who are able to enter the country. Now, this has reached really crazy situations. The law has also something that they have changed in order to make it less harmful, but eventually it was much more harmful. It has a humanitarian council that sits every couple of months and discusses specific cases where they might or might not give family unification permits, even if they don't adequate to the requirements of the law. But what happened this year, when the bill was accepted again, is that they added a maximum request that can be filed according to this humanitarian council. So what they tell you is, let's say, and this limit, let's say it's 200 a year. So you're in October, you're a woman who's facing domestic violence, and you request a family unification, and you want to leave the house, or you want to, I don't know, your child needs to be with his father within the green line. And you're filing this in October. And even though it's an emergency situation and a humanitarian situation, because you are the 201, you are not allowed. So this proves even more that even when it comes to humanitarian concerns, the main concern is demography and ideology. And when we talk ideology, it's a racist and colonial ideology practicing apartheid on Palestinians everywhere. So as we see, if we try to look at this law from a macro point of view, it's a law that basically says very specifically that we practice apartheid. we segregate Palestinians, we practice fragmentation, and we decide when and who has the right to love and to have romantic relationships and eventually maybe marriage. Now, what we were even more surprised when we were researching and writing the petition, that during the 80s, even in apartheid South Africa, the High Court of Justice denied a law that was really very close to this one. So there was a law that was proposed, a bill that was proposed in apartheid South Africa to prevent family unification and to prevent citizenship based on that. And the law was denied in the High Court of Justice. But in the High Court of Justice in Israel, the law was accepted in 2006, 2012. And today, after we filed the petition, we are going to have the hearing in December on the law, alongside 6 other petitions that were filed by different organizations. And hopefully, of course, we always hope for the best. We hope that the law is going to be denied by the High Court of Justice, but eventually we face the chances that we have seen beforehand, and the chances are not that high. Now, despite all that, despite this law that is very specific, that is very, that has very clear apartheid characteristics, and even though Israel faced huge international criticism, which we pointed out also in the appeal, by the Human Rights Committee, by the Special Rapporteur, by different bodies and different organizations from all over the world, it continues to be part of the Israeli law. Now, this, as a general introduction, this is the citizenship and entry law, which is called the Anti-Family Unification Law, and what we have done through this. Now, it's important also to note that the damage that happens to a person who is not able to have family unification is not a damage that happens in an instance, but it's a continuous damage that continues with you all through the years. And this is why specifically we had some of the petitioners who got married in 2002, and until today they are facing challenges. Until today, the wife cannot open a bank account because the bank does not have the trust that she would stay and she can pay back for the bank. Until today, only recently was she able to get a driving license. And if we take the Corona period and we look at another 2 petitioners that we had, they were going to Jenin to visit the family. Okay, so the woman is from Jenin, the man is from Akka. They were going through the checkpoint to Jenin. When they were going back from Jenin to Akka, they were stopped on the checkpoint. The husband and their kids were allowed to cross. The wife was not allowed to cross. Why? Because during Corona, the Israeli government decided that anyone from the West Bank cannot enter. But anyone from the West Bank doesn't include even a person who has been living for 20 years in Akka. So it reaches this level of complexity and this level of little details in everybody's life, and not only on the level of not getting citizenship, and not only on the level of denying dignity and attacking a person only based on who he is, but it's also on the micro level, on the small parts of life, where you are not even allowed to buy a house, you are not allowed to cross a checkpoint, and you are not allowed to maintain a usual life. I hope I gave you a small introduction on the law and on Adalah, and I would be very happy that you would ask me questions and we would have like a good discussion together on the subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adi. Adi, the first question is a difficult question. Where can we find information on the total number of people who have applied for family unification and the categories, like how many are Gaza? How many people are from the West Bank? How many people are from outside the country?
So it is a difficult question. During the Knesset committees that were discussing the law, the Ministry of Interior did represent a number. If I'm not wrong, it was around 2,000 people who had requests until today, but I need to check. But also, it's a very we're not sure about the number, and also from then until today, we have a large number that did file requests, especially because the law, there was a vacuum for a couple of months. There was a void, a legal void, where the law did not pass. And because it's a temporary law that is passed each and every year, there was a period where the law did not exist. So many people filed requests, and this specific number we don't have. So it is going to be around 2,000 until today, but I need to check that to make sure.
2,000 alone? Only 2,000 cases? Sounds
2,000 requests that are pending. That are pending, not requests that have been finalized or denied or accepted.
Oh, okay. So please, we'd appreciate it if you send us the information. I think it is
sure. Yeah.
One more question.
Yes.
Could you please elaborate, building on what you have just said? For the first time, there was an Arab party in the coalition of the government, of the Israeli government. And somehow the law did not pass or was not extended immediately. Could you please tell us more about, what's the status of these, the legal status of these cases? Do they have a chance? How will Israel deal with them?
Are you asking me about specific laws that did not pass?
The family unification, when it was not extended immediately because of, in the last year.
Yeah, so it in July, if I'm not wrong, it was not due to a coalition crisis, not only because of the Arab Party, also for other reasons, the law did not pass. So the law, because of its temporal status, that each and every year it has to be passed again and again. So between July and March, the law did not exist, and the Ministry of Interior had to give specific instructions on how to file requests for family unification, and eventually these requests could, in the theory, reach citizenship. And even though you had this void, the Minister of Interior, Ayelet Shaked, did not accept any request for citizenship based on family unification. So many people who have been in this process for even 20 years, as I mentioned before, even if they filed the request, their request was dealt with. Basically, what they told is that we are dealing with your request, we are processing it, and eventually the law passed, so they didn't have the obligation to continue with it. I think you asked me also about other laws.
No, that was the specific law.
Okay, yeah.
I have also another interesting question. So family unification is not permitted or is very difficult for Palestinian families. And it's easy for Jewish families, correct?
Yes.
What about non-Palestinians, but also non-Jewish, like people from different backgrounds who are living in the country, who have an Israeli passport through a marriage or so on? Can they also face these challenges, or?
So the law addresses very specifically Palestinians and Arabs from enemy states and Iran. So we're talking about people from Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and Palestinians in general. But still, if you have a situation where you, as a citizen of the state, you want to marry another, someone who's foreign, who's not from these countries, the law does not apply. and therefore the process that anyone can get or anyone can go through is allowed for you. So eventually, if you are a citizen of this state and you marry someone from Germany, let's say, so you can have the regular process where you go through different exams, and then you get a permit to stay, and eventually you can get, after a couple of years, you can get citizenship. You are allowed to have that.
But is it like a lengthy process, or it happens? I mean, is it like they still create obstacles and problems?
I mean, I think it's more of a procedural difficulties rather than the difficulties that we have here. So a regular problem with dealing with authorities and stuff. But yeah.
So what about countries, Arab countries that they have a peace treaty with Israel? Are they still identified as enemy states like Jordan and Egypt?
No. And also it would be interesting, what about like the United Arab Emirates and whoever wants to join this parade, what would happen with them? But no, they are not part of the law. Only the specific countries that are specified within the law.
One more question. What happens, have you come across, although it's not very popular, but have you come across a mixed marriage between a Palestinian and a Jew? Do they still also face problems here?
So usually we have this with Palestinian citizens and Jewish Israeli citizens. I personally have not come across a situation where you have a Palestinian from the West Bank or Gaza who is marrying an Israeli and dealing with this problem. But I think it would be very interesting, actually.
Yeah, actually, there's
because I think it's on the rationale it's allowed. Why? Because a Jewish person, a Jewish Israeli, can marry a Jew from Iraq or a Jew from Lebanon. So let's say theoretically there are a group of Jews who are left in Iraq or in Lebanon or whatsoever. They are allowed to come here based on the right of return law and marry another Jewish person. So the law does not affect them.
The story that you have shared about during COVID with the family.
Yeah.
Can you please also share another story that is that you have come across to make it easier for our members to share with their with friends and other communities?
Yeah. So we had a situation where we had a couple who met. They are young. They are below the ages of 25, 23. They have met, if I'm not wrong, in Dubai. They are both Palestinians. One is from Jerusalem, and she has an Israeli citizenship, and the other is right across the separation wall. So pretty close to Jerusalem, if I'm not wrong. I think they are from Bethlehem, if I'm not wrong. And they met in Dubai. They lived together in Dubai. And eventually, after COVID, one of them lost their job. They were not able to continue to live there, and they decided to come here. And when they came here, they started facing the problems of family unification. So they wanted to buy an apartment in Haifa. They can't both take a loan from the bank because one of them only has a citizenship, and she cannot bear the burden alone to take the loan. But eventually they rented an apartment in Haifa. He had a work permit to work within the Green Line, but they were not allowed to live together because of family unification. So what happened is actually an absurd. So as a Palestinian from the West Bank, you can get a work permit and you can work in Israel, but you are not allowed to unify with your family because of the family unification law. And it's an interesting legal situation where you are allowed entry, you are allowed to work, but when it comes to meeting with your family, you can do that because of the work permit, but you are prevented because of the law preventing you from unifying with your family. So they were allowed, eventually they lived together and they were in the same household for a period of time. But eventually he lost his work permit. And when he lost his work permit, he lived in, well, they rented an apartment in Beit Hanina in Jerusalem. And he would come and visit every now or so they could meet, or she would go to Bethlehem in order for them to meet. So this created a very crazy life where they had to move from Haifa, where the wife had work. She found a very good job. She decided to continue her studies in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And eventually, they would only meet on occasions, or they would only meet when it was possible for her to visit him, or he would find a work permit, or I would not say that, but he would find a way to enter to visit her. I think this represents the complication of the situation where you have to change your whole life in order to live with your partner.
Thank you. Actually, we also have a friend from here who his wife would sometimes, it is between getting permits, it would be delayed. And for 6 months, she doesn't have a permit and she remains a prisoner at the house. She's not allowed to leave because she's afraid that she would be caught and taken outside Jerusalem. So she would remain a prisoner at the house. We have a question with when people, they try to fight this law or to apply for family unification and they go through the court system. It must be a very expensive experience. How much does it cost the family, and how do people do it, pursuing it legally?
So first of all, if we're talking about appeals against the law, well, Adalah does it for free. As an organization, of course, petitioners came to us and they requested that they want to appeal against the law. Now, when we're talking about the day-to-day dealing with the family unification processes, it is expensive. First of all, it's expensive that you many times have to take days off of your work in order to prove that you are married, in order to prove that you have a successful marriage life. And also you have to file requests, and you have to file many things, and beside that you also have things that are way more expensive because of the family unification. So as I mentioned earlier, there was a petition that eventually allowed people who went through family unification to have healthcare in Israel. So even if you have a right to have healthcare in Israel, it's much more expensive for you to get that. And many times family do not have the ability to maintain this and the ability to pay for this healthcare, especially if they don't work. So these are the problems that face, economically speaking, many of these families, because only one partner is working and the other one is not working because they cannot be employed with what they learned, or because they would not be employed as a discriminatory process or as a discriminatory decision, they cannot maintain this situation economically. And many of them eventually move. They either move to the West Bank, or some of them move abroad and cannot continue and maintain their family.
Thank you, Adi. Adi, are you aware of a similar scenario in the world that you told me South Africa, or you told us that in South Africa they tried to pass it, but it did not work out? Is there anywhere else in the world that they have a similar law?
There is nowhere in the world, nowhere that we know of at least, where they have even a similar process like this. There is nowhere in the world where the enemy doctrine that was part of World War II and was later on denied by most countries, where this enemy doctrine continues. And in our appeal, we even referenced Hannah Arendt very popular sentence that as a Jew, I was discriminated against in Germany, and I moved to France, and in France, I was discriminated against for being German, and I was moved to the United States. In the United States, I was discriminated against again for being whoever. So this is basically what the law is. It sticks your Palestinian identity, it gives it a negative understanding and humanizes you on the grounds, on the level, only because you are described as an enemy or coming from an enemy entity. Now, very few countries still have this approach, very few. And even the countries that do have, they do not have a systematic discriminatory law that prevents families from unifying.
I would just like to add, Ronald, if you're hearing us, I'm sorry, I cannot understand the question. If you could write it in a different way or somebody else could help me understand it. I want to ask you, so why do you think, I mean, how effective is this law in really for Israel? Is it beneficial? It's getting so much attention from the world in a negative way for Israel. It's bad PR. How is Israel benefiting from it?
So internally, if we go back to the origins of the law, it started basically as a campaign after the Second Intifada. The law was presented as a law that could potentially prevent terrorist attacks against Israelis. Now, the rationale behind that, what they said, is that many people who come from family unification, so let's say they have a Palestinian mother from the West Bank or a Palestinian father from the West Bank or Gaza, they, if they have one of these parents, they are more likely to perform a terrorist attack. And they based this on very weird statistics that said the statistics that came from the Shin Bet, from the intelligence, from the Israeli intelligence, which said basically that there were around 40 cases or 50 cases of Palestinians who come from a Palestinian mother or father from the West Bank, Gaza, and the other an Israeli, Palestinian Israeli, and they were part of a terrorist attack. So this was the first rationale behind it, and this is why they said we have security concerns for the law. And this is very convincing for the Israeli public. This is very convincing because
fear tactics.
What?
Fear. When people are afraid, they're willing to accept anything.
Exactly. So it's based on fear. It's based on framing all Palestinians as enemies and all Israelis as friends, segregating between both nations, and deciding basically who's good and who's not. And the weird part about this is that in the last committees that discussed the law this year, what the Shin Bet said in the intelligence agencies is that the grandkids of these families, now before they said the families and their kids, now the grandkids of these families have the potential or are part of so-called terrorist attacks. So the absurd statement is that there's something in the genetics of Palestinians when they marry from both sides of the green line that eventually reaches out to a terrorist attack. Now, in order to make things clear, a terrorist attack could be even participating in a demonstration. So many of the people that were talked about in these committees are people who protested during December in the Naqab against deforestation and the confiscation of the lands in the Naqab. they were part of the rationale against this law, or for the law, actually. So it's a very racist ideology that covers itself in security concerns at this level, where at this point that even, I think that even international condemnation does not even matter.
Thank you. There's so many questions. I don't know if we can either we're not going to be able to answer them, or we need to have shorter answers. We have to do a better job, me and you.
Yeah, maybe I should open the chat box also.
No, don't worry. It's easier for me because I'm.
Yeah, it's hard for me to, yeah.
Okay. So Adi, so what are the major international responses that came critiquing this law? Did the UN make like a statement? Did other governments or major human rights organizations condemn them? International, not local.
So the Human Rights Council condemns this law almost every year in its report, in its resolution about Israel. We also have the report of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights on the implementation of human rights and their resolutions. Also, the Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices affecting the human rights of the Palestinian people and other Arabs of the occupied territories in 2017. We also have different organizations, also local and also international, that condemned this, and also other committees of the United Nations, like the Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Concluding Observations, filed every year as part of the convention. Also, the elimination of racial discrimination concluding observations that are filed every year as part of the discussions within the convention. So there is a lot of international condemnation from different bodies of the UN. I'm not very sure about the policy of a lot of states. Many of them do not have a clear opinion about this law. From meetings that we had with ambassadors, where we did actually raise concern about this law, many of them did talk about it or discuss it, but we do not, or we don't have a very specific idea on what they're standing on the subject.
So some of our friends in the US are asking, do you have like a chapter or Friends of Adalah in the US that people can support?
So we have an international advocacy department that is here in Haifa. We have a lot of connections in the US. I would gladly point you out to Rina Rosenberg, who is the head of the International Advocacy Department in Adalah.
If you send it to us by email, don't look for it now. Let's try to answer, and we will send it out to this within the recording for everyone. Okay. With all the information that we've asked for, hopefully. I mean, whatever you can find.
So please just someone remind me that remind me to send you.
Yes, I will. So a question is like, why do you think that there are so many Palestinians are willing to go this struggle of getting married? It is with people from different sides of the wall, let's say. Why are Palestinians continue doing it, and although it's very difficult?
So first of all, love.
Love,
I guess, and it has no rationale. It has no.
It becomes more romantic to marry someone from the other side.
Yeah, it's much more, spicing things up. But I think that many people have family connections or cultural connections. Like the Green Line does not make any sense to Palestinians. Now, I'm not even talking politically, even culturally, and from a social point of view. Many families got separated because of the Green Line, but they still maintain their family connections or their cultural connections. And many times, in many instances, you have Palestinians from Israel who study in Jenin, in Nablus, and they meet Palestinians from the West Bank. And it's only natural when you meet people that love, partnership, relationships would happen. So I think it's a natural thing. And the fact that despite the law that is trying to fight this phenomenon of love between both borders, and the fact that it's still continuing, basically shows what's natural and what's not.
Yeah, I mean, it's very funny. I mean, it's Israel can be very stupid, or most of the time is very stupid.
Yeah.
So we have a case. So to be clear, somebody has written about somebody that we know from Bethlehem. He has a Palestinian ID, and his wife is from the US, an American, and they're still having for over 30 years problems with family unification. Why is Israel controlling people from Bethlehem getting married to somebody from the US? Aren't they supposed to be under the Palestinian Authority?
So this is a different type of control and oppression. The West Bank is officially under occupation, under military rule by the military commander of the West Bank. And the scope of his control on the Palestinian society is very large. Even if we're talking about Area A, even if we're talking about areas where the Palestinian Authority supposedly has authority, when it comes to citizenship, when it comes to family unification, when it comes to whatever requests concerning something that is beyond you going to the supermarket, Israel does practice its control and intervenes in life. But it's important to notice this: the citizenship and entry law is not effective in the West Bank. It does have extra territorial effect because it affects Palestinians who are outside of the Green Line. But if you are practicing your family in Bethlehem, what we would argue is that you cannot say that the law can be practiced in that area because it's extraterritorial application of the law.
Thank you. A case that some marriages don't work out between people from both sides of the wall, or both sides from the Green Line, or with different colors of IDs. I don't know which terminology is. To which courts do they go to? And
non-binary IDs.
Yes. What happens to the children? Like, who decides? And I mean, it's when people need to go through this process.
So this is a very interesting situation where, let's say, yeah, a marriage does not work after 20 years. Why am I not allowed to stay? Didn't I form some kind of connection with the space that I'm living in for the last 20 years? Can't I even have the possibility to request in any way citizenship or a permit to stay? So the answer is no. That answer is no. So because you are prevented from family unification, and in that sense you are prevented citizenship, if your marriage fails, you might not be allowed to stay in the country. So what happens if the wife is from Jenin, they are based in Akka or Haifa or whatsoever, the marriage fails, so the wife has to leave to Jenin and the kids should be torn apart. So in this situation, what the state tells you, this is why we have the humanitarian committee. So you file a request to the humanitarian committee. But if you surpass the limitation that they have given to the number of requests that can be dealt every year, you might need to wait for half a year, let's say, 6 months, 7 months, I don't know how much. And eventually the kids have to travel between Jenin and Akka or Jenin or Haifa. Now, as to the status of the kids eventually need to get Israeli citizenship because one of their parents is Israeli. But there have been instances where kids were basically with no status whatsoever, or they were giving a very limited status, a permit, which is pretty close to the one given to people from Jerusalem, I'm sure, Omar, you can also connect on that topic. So many instances, you would not get citizenship, but you would get a blue identity, allowing you to stay or to live or to have healthcare and whatsoever, but you cannot vote and you cannot have citizenship, and you have to prove that your center of life is in the state. So eventually, if you were born to this family, you might not be able to travel for a long period because you would lose your status. So the law discriminates not only against people who get married, but also against their kids.
Adi, some are confused. Why does Israel make this law temporary, like every year it needs to be extended? Why isn't it like an ongoing law?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So the law was first passed as a temporary law. Now, the reason for it to pass as a temporary law is to give some kind of easy situation for the High Court of Justice to accept the law. So the High Court of Justice, when it first discussed the law in 2006, they told the members of the Knesset, you have to do a couple of revisions, you have to do a couple of changes. And eventually the law passed, even it passed 6 against 5, 6 judges against 5 judges. And eventually it passed because it was temporary. So the court said, because this is a law that is temporary, that has to be renewed every year, it is proportionate, the damage is proportionate due to the fact that it can be changed each and every year. But what happened eventually, that the law is renewed for the last 20 years or so, 19 years. And this is what we argued in this appeal, that this law is not temporary despite each and every attempt of the Knesset to describe it as temporary. It is not temporary. It has caused a very, very structural situation, a continuous situation where you are not able to maintain a family or do family unification. And even if it could be discussed that the law is temporary, it causes a continuous damage. And the fact that it causes a continuous damage, there is no meaning of it being temporary.
I've been to the High Court for the first time when we were fighting for the freedom of worship during Easter. And it's a very impressive building, and you feel that this is a place where justice could have a place. And you feel the judges, I mean, it is at least my perspective, although they did not rule in our favor. But in a way, you feel that there is somehow that they're tempted to do justice genuinely. How can people who claim to be High Court of Justice accept such a stupid law? What is the rationale of the judges when you go to the court?
So first of all, we're entering the level of analysis. Now, the analysis can be right, the analysis can be wrong. From our experience with the High Court of Justice, first of all, as in any court, they eventually have to base their opinion, their legal opinion, on the laws that do exist. And since the Israeli legal system, in its essence, is racist, in its essence, builds up racial discrimination, it's very hard to imagine or to even expect decisions that could be ruled in our favor, except if the judge practices activism and makes a decision that is outside of the legal rationale. So we're talking about a system that in its structure is racist, in its structure practices apartheid. So many times, as was the situation also in South Africa, the court is tied up, and if it wants to change, it has to practice activism, which also happened in many instances in South Africa. Now, what we see in many cases, especially in the last couple of years, that the court or the judges change. We had a situation where we did have liberal judges who could rule in our favor for, let's say, during the first couple of years of the 2000s. But today, many of them are conservative. Some of them are even settlers who live in the West Bank. So the current situation of the High Court of Justice is a situation where it's really hard to get decisions that are in your benefit as Palestinian. Just recently, we had a decision concerning filing for damage if you are from Gaza and you were attacked by an Israeli soldier. So the case of Nabahin, that we recently had a decision from the High Court of Justice, a decision for appeal that we filed, which basically says that if you were shot at, even if not during a military operation, so let's say you were close to the border between Gaza and Israel, not border, but blockade, but you know what I mean, and you were shot by a soldier, you cannot request in a civil action, request for because of the damage that happened, request to have some kind of confiscation. You cannot have this because you are a citizen of an enemy area. So even if the military violates international law, even if the military violates the Geneva Conventions, you do not have the basis to file, according to the Israeli tort law, to file for compensation. Now, this represents, I think, in its essence, what's happening in the High Court of Justice. That even if you have cases where people were attacked, were shot at, were whatever, even if it's a mistake, you know what? It's a mistake. A soldier made a mistake and shot that person. The court tells you that even if it was a mistake on our behalf, a mistake on behalf of Israel, even that you are not allowed to get any compensation.
Layers and layers of injustice, Adi. I mean, I hope you will be able also to send us also like some things that we could do, practical things to expose this law or to join or even to sign a petition.
I would gladly also send you the PR about the petition that we filed and like an English explanation about the law, if that's helpful.
Yes, I will send you also an email with everything that we'd hope to include in the next newsletter and the summary that we will send out with the recording.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Nice to find a young Palestinian filled with energy, and you seem happy and hopeful, yeah, which is a good thing.
Which is weird, actually, and it makes no sense.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense. It makes sense. This is, I mean, this is good. Fighting oppression is good. Adi, first of all, it's a pleasure to meet you. And I think a number of years ago, you've written in the Kairos Christmas alert, right?
I did, yeah.
Year?
This year, I think.
This year. So we need to look at
last year. I feel like this whole period was a year, like the whole 2 years was a year. So yeah.
We will look it up and we will include the link to it and we will send it and we'll to get to know your work. Adi, thank you so much for today. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. A link of this video gathering, along with the other links shared today, and things hopefully we will get Adi and us, will be available on Kumi Now website and on YouTube in the coming days.
So thank you, Omar, and thank you, everyone. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you, Adi. I mean, I hope we'll invite you in the coming week or 2 weeks when you defeat this law to celebrate, not to talk about the tactics. Inshallah. So look for our email newsletter. Please share it with friends who the family unification law, and this session is a simple session. Just so you know, it's illegal to love, it's illegal to get married, it's illegal to live together. And in a way, it's illegal to fight it too. So it is sometimes illegal things are good. So together, Adi, in solidarity. Thank you so much, and thank you, Ryan, and thank you all for joining us. Take care, friends.
Thank you.
Thank you.